Hi everyone, and welcome to episode 5 of the Race Sim Central podcast, where simmers of grizzle sit in something in a room and talk darkness or whatever. I'm John Denton, and today with me I once again have Big Simon Crofto and Tim the Governor Wheatley. How's it going, Tim?
Good, thanks. At the time of recording, things are a little bit crazy, but there's various things going on with the website, like just posting a single news item on Rensport created a fair amount of drama. But yeah, other than that, things are kind of sailing along as normal.
Sailing along. Simon, how are you doing?
I'm alright, thank you. I sort of currently aren't unwell with any particular ailment, and I've done some simming, so
makes a change. We've delayed. We've delayed for about a month because one of us was ill, or something else was going on, or Starfield came out, or something like that. So I think that finally we've got going again, and hopefully there's still going to be some listeners out there. So you said you've been simming, Simon. What have you been simming?
I have. Well, I mean, so the first step was actually like clearing all the pile of rubbish off my rig so I could actually sit down, and then I was reminded of the joys of PC gaming as I just had to jump through many hoops to get certain things working, from the headset to you and I had a go online. It took us about an hour to get that working.
Port forwarding. For a Seto Corsa, right? Yeah. And
so basically we had to go in a Seto Corsa. I've been driving that a bit, and then the main development for me was you very kindly sent me an old shifter. I think possibly prompted by our discussion in the last one about cheating and hardware limitations coming up. So that's been it's a new revelation for me of a kind of hard to go back once you've got it. It did require a bit of a screwdriver and soldering iron to get it working properly, as our online session descended into complete farce for multiple reasons.
But it had been in a box in the corner of my loft for probably 10 years at least, or I'd upgraded from that shifter. It's the ACT Labs shifter, Tim. You may remember the old ACT Labs wheel and pedal set. It was, I think, the first set that came with 3 pedals and a shifter all bundled in. And this was back a long time ago, and I bought that set specifically for that reason, because if you're going to drive, you've got to drive properly. So we talked about getting together to drive like classic Porsche, and of course Simon wasn't allowed to do that without a shifter, so I sent this over to him.
Nice.
However, in right away we realised that third gear didn't engage, did it?
No, third gear wouldn't stay engaged.
Right.
So you just drive along, and then the revs.
That's quite a realistic simulation, then, right?
and the thing as well is as we realised, that car only has 4 gears, so losing a gear is really quite important.
Yeah, quite a big,
more so
big
than
impact.
ever.
There's got a lot of low end torque from the turbo, but we drove the Porsche 935. What's it called? Moby Dick, long tail, crazy car.
Yeah, so John, you suggested this car as like something of a, why not this? So I was like, yeah, sure.
It's a Curio.
Yeah, and I think I'd certainly not taken it out before, and I took it out for a go, and I was actually out for a walk around near my house where I was messaging you saying, yeah, I got out in it. I was like, it's interesting, it's quite feisty. I said it's really hard in the slow speed stuff though, and then it was actually during this walk I looked up on Wikipedia to find out it doesn't have a diff, which
solid
explains
rear axle,
it was designed specifically really for Le Mans. So as I was trying to navigate the chicanes of Barcelona and stuff, it was like, it's quite a challenge. But
it was really interesting, the challenge that having the solid rear axle brought, I thought, in the sense that you would you'd have corners where you would think that, say, third gear is the right gear, but because the locked rear axle was pushing too much in third, based on the rev range, you would understeer too much, so you'd actually want to go down into second, bring the revs right up, which would actually then speed up that rear axle and cause the back end to rotate much better. And it was crazy because then you're changing up to third immediately as you exit the corner or something like that. But it's quite interesting. I think Assetto Corsa has a wide range of curios like this, cars that aren't available really in any other sim, cars that aren't necessarily that good for sort of sim racing, as it were. I think when you look at iRacing, for instance, there's a lot of focus in iRacing on conducive online racing. What's gonna give us a good series, and what's going to bring people in and keep people racing, and it means that you won't necessarily find something like a Porsche 935 Moby Dick because
I think the 18 list screams passion rather than necessarily greatness sense for what's going to from the server.
I think it's great. There's some great cars in there that, as you say, they scream passion. Like Alfa 33 Stradale and Maserati 250F. The Lotus 25 is just sublime. But I don't know if I'd want to race it. I mean, this is the thing I find, you race something that's that sort of tricky or difficult to drive, then you have to practice every day to keep yourself in point on something like that.
So, just thinking about that a little bit, what do you guys think are the passion cars that are in iRacing just because somebody really loves them and wanted them there? Probably the Lotus 49?
Lotus 49, Lotus 79, Nissan ZX-T, Audi 90 GTO.
Haven't they brought like an old NASCAR in as well?
There's a group.
Yes.
There's 4 old NASCARs, which I believe Dale Earnhardt Jr. was involved in funding for those. I think.
Yeah.
So there's 4 now: Pontiac, Chevrolet, the whole lot basically, which I think is great as well.
Yeah, they're some of the most popular cars on the series. It seems I when I'm scrolling through Twitter, I see more posts on them than the modern cars by a long, long way.
I was tempted to buy one because they do one round at Watkins Glen, of course. Usually, it's not on every season. I thought I'd buy it, but because my oval license isn't good enough, I'm still not allowed to join the road race. It's a bit strange that I would have thought that I should be able to turn up as a road ringer for Watkins Glen. But
yeah, it's interesting that they haven't tackled that yet with the licensing system. Where you could be the road ringer, which is a real life thing in NASCAR.
I think it's I would say it's a bit of a limitation, but it's not necessarily because I can't remember. Oh yeah, I've raced in the IndyCar series, which when it was officially called that anyway, and you had both oval and road races, and I could compete in the road races. I was only allowed to do practice for the oval races, so it should be similar, but I guess probably something about database configuration. But yeah, ultimately, I saw a video from Matt Malone streaming driving those cars. I think he was at Daytona Road Course, and they all have drum brakes. So they obviously got a pretty hefty chunk of horsepower, and they arrive at turn 1 for Daytona Road Course, and you have to brake months before you've seen the corner.
Right.
Entertaining stuff.
Yeah.
So
yes, I think I kind of brought up in the past, if I was to make my kind of dream sim, I would go for kind of 94 and stuff like that, and the differences between 87 and 94 aren't that massive, so I'm pretty pleased that something historic from NASCAR has actually got in there.
Yeah, I mean, I think something historic at all. I mean, there's often a post in iRacing forums about getting like a 1990s champ car into the service, and I don't know whether that would circumvent the IndyCar license work on the basis that it would be champ car, but I don't know how that works. But at the end of the day, I think there is. I mean, I think it's difficult to say because I think you get a lot of people asking about it, a lot of clamour for it, but then when the car comes out or is a real thing, people realise how hard it is to drive. I mean, this season there's been a big release. So if we sort of move on to what I've been simming, there was the big release of a lot of new cars in iRacing. When was it? September, and I've been driving the Super Formula car. Which obviously the premier single-seater series from Japan, and these are the fastest cars in the world aside from Formula 1 cars, basically. So they lap circuit like Suzuka 4 seconds off the pace. 4 seconds off the pace of the back of the F1 grid, I would say, because Verstappen's 2 seconds ahead of that. But he's also kind of 1 second ahead of second place. But basically they're pretty quick and challenging, and they got a lot of horsepower and very little weight. It's not an overly complicated car, unlike say the hybrids and things like that. It doesn't have a great deal of stuff to have to configure from an electronics perspective. It's much more basic on the chassis setup.
Is it aerodynamically more simple as well? Well, it will be than an F1 car because everything is. But I mean, is it very peaky, or is it a quite simple aero?
No, it's a stable aero package provided by Dallara. So it's a Dallara provided car. This was in response to escalating costs in Super Formula in the late 2010s, so up to 2019 and so on. The Honda cars were kind of dominating, and there was a push for more parity. So they put engine parity in place. I think that's slowly changing over the years because it limits the point of why the manufacturers bother with it. But the aero kits are identical, and they're a provided kit, and I believe that there's no development on that. Again, I don't know whether that will change in the future, whether Mugen, for instance, will start being, or at least petitioning the governing body to be able to develop it. But from our perspective right now, you've got a fixed body kit, you've got a front wing and a rear wing, and actually relatively limited movement within them, as in the amount of adjustments available in the wing setup. And to be fair, nearly every circuit other than it's in much the same way you would with Formula 1 now, nearly every circuit other than Monza you're running max downforce or something near it. They have stock gearboxes as well. You can't change the gear ratios. So obviously as you go from circuit to circuit, this simplifies the setup or the changes, because you are generally running max wings, obviously running the same gear ratios because you've got no choice. But my point really is that this is a new series, so it's very busy, and it's great for me to be able to jump in and go, whatever time I'm planning to, I can get a race. Whereas comparatively in, say, the Lotus 79, Lotus 49, or the other historic cars, you have to, there are specific times when everybody's getting together, and that's the time when you see population on the servers. Whereas, if you want to just jump on a Thursday night and get a Lotus 79 race, you're not going to get one. You have to get on when everybody's on, and the whole audience around the Lotus 79 is like 120 people at most, and on average, the most people you see turning up for a race will be maybe 60 people. So the comparison is stark that now practically any time of the day there are populated servers running the Super Formula. What I'll be intrigued to see is where that sits in 6 months' time, because it's not such an easy car to drive. Like a couple of the races I've done, you see a lot of people certainly spinning off in the early laps. The tyres are very tough, so it takes certainly on some tracks can take up to 3 laps to be up to temperature, sort of carcass temperature that is. So you see a lot of people spinning off in those early laps, for instance, when the tyres aren't up to temperature.
Can you then push them quite hard after that, though?
Yeah, I'd say you can. Yeah, in quite a gratifying way, even when the track temperature is very hot, which is again rare for me in iRacing. I think whereas other cars I've experienced, the track temperature can be really hot, and you really limits how much you can push the tyre, because it brings that sort of the edge of adhesion becomes very slight. These tyres seem to be a lot better. I feel like, and I felt similar. I drove the new IMSA Porsche 963. I feel like some of these newer cars coming into the service obviously have a lot more quite specific tyre data coming in, that they're able to take from the car manufacturers or the people running the cars, and compared to something like a Lotus 79, which doesn't have that tyre data, where they're sort of a bit more finger in the air with how the tyre should behave. It's interesting. But yeah, as I say, I'm mostly interested. I think it gets a lot of attention because it's a new car. It gets a lot of attention because it's a very fast car. But people will inevitably, I think, get frustrated with a car if they continue to find it too challenging. So, maybe I'm wrong, and I would like to hope I'm wrong, that in 6 months' time it's still going strong, but we'll see.
I guess it depends what else comes into service, as well as just has. So obviously, as a new car, as you say, and it's had like a bump in popularity, so you got a lot of highly kind of captive audience there. But I guess in 6 months, if something new and shiny comes along, people will jump to that, as opposed to like actually seeing how the popularity sort of more naturally fades and spreads across the rest of the field and stuff.
Yeah, I think it's actually brought in quite a big crowd who were racing the Dallara Formula 3 car as well, that have probably been maybe driving that for a year or two and are ready for a step up in performance. I know that certainly a lot of people in that community have been keen for a faster single-seater.
What class have they put it into? Like what license class?
B, Class B.
B? Oh, that probably fits, yeah.
I think there's a fixed setup series which I think might be Class C. I'm not sure. I haven't touched.
Okay.
Obviously, you know me. I haven't touched the fixed setup series. Saying that, it's entirely possible that if I look in 6 months' time and find that the open setup series isn't getting quite as much population, I might find that the fixed setup series is still quite well populated. So we'll see.
Yeah.
I mean, I've been experimenting with setup a fair bit. I guess I've done, I don't know, about 1,200 kilometres in the car now, and it's not hugely complicated, because you have, I think, when you're not having to work with gear ratios so much, and there's no like adjustment of things like steering ratio, and it's I think kind of once you've found a setup that you're fairly comfortable with, it's probably going to work across most circuits. With minor changes,
That sounds like my kind of setup adjustments.
I mean, the way I see it, you can sort of adjust the car to exert its maximum downforce capability by running it low and stiff, but that makes the car more difficult to drive, and so you are working on a trade-off of stiffness. The level of stiffness that you as the driver can cope with, if you know what I mean. So I think,
okay.
And I think that pretty much ties up with the way they set up the car in real life, and the way we see in Formula 1 as well recently, with ground effect being so important. You see the drivers that are able to cope with a stiffer and potentially more pointy car are able to exert more pace out of it.
Yeah, even within the same team. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, and have you been doing any simming, Tim, or has it been Starfield non-stop?
It's pretty much been Starfield, even though we've had a huge delay on when we were going to do this, and I intended to do like laps in a car that you guys were planning to do laps in. Starfield just kept pulling me back.
Does Starfield have a vehicle in it, like a car?
It doesn't. They specifically designed it without them. It's just spaceships that kind of fly around via the mouse on PC. You basically are following the gun target, with your mouse, and it kind of similar to Freelancer in a way, if you ever played that. And then it's just a way to get from one loaded area to another loaded area.
You make it sound so engaging. It is strange, really, in a way, because it is the future, and you would have thought that you'd load a quad bike into the back of your truck for your ship for when you want to go bouncing along that moon or whatever. But
yeah, it's you do have ways to kind of navigate pretty quickly. You can kind of do, like real astronauts do, kind of the moon bounces with the with the legs and stuff. You can kind of time it right where you can do those to go faster than you can run and stuff like that. But if you want to explore around a planet, you basically can get back to your ship pretty quick and just move to a different next door to where you were pretty much on the planetary map and stuff. So yeah, it's all good.
Okay, so I believe you had a topic for us this week, this month, this episode.
Yeah,
Tim.
It's an interesting one because I mean I myself can see both sides of it. I can see the need for it and the way that it annoys me at the same time. I can see that it's never been done perfectly right, no matter how much money is thrown at it, and it's been done wrong a lot, and it is eSports. It's something that, like I said, I can definitely see the need for. There is, there's sponsors out there. There's people that want to hold events. I think the kind of bringing up Rensport, I think the way that was done was great. It kind of exposed it to an audience. You have a lot of esports teams that have come in that were historically kind of first-person shooter teams that have come in and actually have racing teams, which is great. That was really interesting. But obviously they're there for the money. And
can I just check? Is it money that makes something an e-sport as opposed to not?
No, I think it's more about like it being broadcast as a competition, but money certainly helps, isn't it? Okay. Would you not say?
I mean, it's difficult to say because I mean I've been in leagues where if you won the league, you got a trophy, but you didn't get any money. And I would have never thought of that as an esport.
I mean, I would say it's about broadcast and about people watching in a way. But I mean, actually, technically speaking, a sport is just doing something. So if you're going up the park to play footy with the kids, you're doing sport. So in theory, esports is just racing in sims at all. I guess we're talking competitive esports, but broadcasts, audiences. Like one of the points you were making earlier, Tim, is you can see that it should exist, blah blah blah. What you didn't say is that there are people that want to watch it, and that's the big question mark I have around it, really.
That's the big thing, is that again, if you look at Rensport, the viewing figures early on were really, really high, and I watched it too, and I didn't watch it for the esports. I watched it to get a look at Rensport.
Right, which a lot of people would have done.
Yeah, I think that's where the big numbers came from.
What was the viewing platform? Is this Twitch or something? Sorry, YouTube?
It was on everything. Yeah,
right.
You could see like each team broadcasting, and then obviously official channels and things as well. But yeah,
when are we talking
on BBC
here?
Two, Simon?
No. when are we talking here then, Tim? Are we talking 2022?
Oh yeah, they've been doing this for about a year now, I think.
Right.
With their official races and stuff. They're actually still running races right now. I think they actually had one even last weekend, perhaps.
It was a bit of a crash fest, if I recall.
But yeah, like I noticed that the viewing figures are down. Everything is down. I think it'll be up next time because there's obviously a little bit of controversy around the sim right now. But the only reason that I watched was to get a look at the sim, and that's not to say that the racing was bad, that it looked bad, that the presentation was bad, like anything like that. I think everything that they did was great, and I think that they made the sim look as good as it could. But obviously, when you watched it, it gave a realistic impression to someone who's educated on sim racing of the state that the sim was actually in, and I honestly think that's why most people watched.
When you say that, you mean in a kind of warts and all way?
Yeah, there was. I think you can kind of tell that the car isn't connected to the road in a very nice way. It kind of it looks like there's a layer of jelly between the tire and the track. You know, and it doesn't. Based on what you could really easily see, even from the first event, the driver input didn't look like there wasn't a layer of jelly between the steering inputs and what was actually happening too.
So you're talking car behaviour here, not just graphical fidelity or whatever else.
Yeah, and I actually posted a news post like right after their first event because I was solidly impressed. You know, they put on an event. They were able to host servers, whether it was done locally or over the internet or whatever. The fact is that they were able to do it. There were relatively few issues with the software that affected the event. And as far as the event is concerned, it was totally successful. But you know, at the same time, I just wonder what it does for anybody. You know, does it? If a sponsor is coming in, are they getting their money back on this? Is this, you know, someone who, like, I would even wonder if someone's even thought about doing stuff like this as a tax write-off. You know, but it's I kind of wonder who it's actually successful for, other than the team that wins taking some money away with them.
There's got to be a question about
just aren't there.
There's got to be a question about sustainability here as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
You can launch something and get a bump, you know, a bit like, you know, whether we're talking about a new car in iRacing or whatever, but I don't know, are people going to be watching this in a year's time, 2 years' time, 3 years' time? It sounds like it's already tailed off.
Well, so one question, Tim, when you say in the early stuff the viewing figures were good, I mean, what is that good? How many are we talking approximately?
Oh, there was, as far as I can remember, there was like over 10,000 and stuff like that. Like they were getting decent numbers. But if you looked at any of the finals on like iRacing and stuff like that, which is kind of less publicized in a way, as an, you know, eSports thing, even though it completely is. You know, they do just as well. So I don't really feel like. Well,
so what I feel is that 10,000 people mostly watching are probably other sim racers, right? Is there anything you can imagine that? Oh, can you imagine why somebody who is not a sim racer is going to watch one of these races?
It's going to have to be support of the eSports team. I think that really would be.
But why would? Oh, you mean because they might support the first person shooter team?
Yeah, there's a one that, you know, is the main one is called I think it's FaZe Clan. You know, they're a pretty big esports organization.
And are they playing CS:GO?
I don't actually recall which first person shooter.
Okay. Well, I mean, I've just brought up some quick numbers, and CS:GO, for instance, which was second place in 2022's esports charts, peak viewers was 2.2 million.
Yeah. Total
hours watched over the year 2022 was 448 million. I don't see any, you know, like iRacing or Rensport or any of the others. I don't see any sim racing events, you know, even approaching these numbers, right? So the question to me is, well, for one thing, why would anybody who's not currently a sim racer watch it? You know, like I've watched iRacing live broadcast races, sometimes because people I know are in them, but other times just because, you know, I'm bored and flicking around YouTube. But I'm a sim racer. My dad watches motorsport. If I asked him to, I sent him an iRacing race on YouTube, and was like, "Oh, this is great. You should watch this." He would use several swear words whilst telling me exactly why he's not going to. But you know, he will watch. He's watched Formula One religiously all of his life, whatever. But you know, I think there's a disconnect, and this is something I know we talked about privately, but basically, when a video game is replicating something in real life, be it motor racing or football or cricket or whatever, baseball perhaps, I think the MLB game does eSports stuff actually, doesn't it? The viewer numbers, you know, the people that watch the meat sports version of that look at the esports version like some sort of joke, right? And you know, I don't necessarily agree with them on that front. You know, they'll say, "Whoa, what are they doing?" You know, but nobody knows when they're watching an iRacing broadcast that somebody might have a direct drive wheel and like replicating it. You know, a point somebody actually, an F1 journalist I know raised to me was that like actually in sim racing at least they're doing the same thing. They're turning a steering wheel and they're pushing pedals, which is the same as what the race drivers are doing in real life, notwithstanding various exploits that we covered in last episode. Whereas if you watch FIFA and a FIFA esports tournament, they're not kicking a ball around, they're using a gamepad. And so, you know, the wider world looks at this and goes, well, why am I going to watch somebody play a video game, right? And you know, I understand why they say that, and I know that what draws me to watch it is mostly the fact that I understand the experience of doing it. I know what's involved in doing it. I know how challenging it can be. I don't think, like, my dad has the slightest idea and is not interested in finding out, you know. And I know that he's old, but equivalent, I could say my nephew, who is young, he would have the same response, basically. He's not really that into video games, but sure, he's 24 years old, and wouldn't watch online races unless maybe I was in it.
Yeah, I mean, I've just brought up some figures, and it's actually a little bit worse than I thought. It was probably better last year, but of the last kind of six rounds, the first round, which was earlier this year, had 5,200 peak viewers. The highest round, which was round 2, 7,470 peak viewers.
Yeah.
So, and then it's basically tailed off since. There's been less and less and less, up to round 6.
And you know, there are YouTubers I follow that do live stream, like YouTubers around, say, talking about movies, and they do a live stream where there's a few of them talking about movies that will get way more viewers than that sort of thing, right?
Just so, I mean, going back to your question, John, of like who would watch this or why or whatever, as someone who likes real motorsport and as someone who likes simming enough to be sat here recording a podcast about it, you know, so I'm reasonably interested. I think I've watched one live race. You know, I'll happily watch, you know, you stick up a YouTube video of you doing some laps or a race or something, I'll watch that. I watch various videos and stuff, but in terms of actually like watching a stream or kind of a competitive thing, I watched one, which I think is definitely answers the like, why did I watch it? Because it was during COVID. It was when there was no real racing happening, and it was when there was a race. I think it was like a historic F1 around Monaco, and Alonso was involved.
Yeah,
that's what it took to get me to actually watch this, and I think I watched it for about 5 minutes and basically thought, this is shit. I am not watching this because it might be someone I really like in real life and respect and know can drive. It was quite apparent from watching 30 seconds of it that these guys aren't taking this seriously. You know, they're not driving this like it's real. They're not treating it with that kind of level of respect. And frankly, I just could not care less about watching other people racing in a sim. And the thing is that when it comes to who watches, I think it occupies an interesting spot when it comes to kind of simming in esports, because if you look at like big esports, you're talking things like Counter-Strike, Dota 2, League of Legends,
League of Legends, yeah.
Fortnite, StarCraft,
Mobile Legends, Bang Bang,
and whatever the others are. And there's a few things with that.
Dota 2, don't forget that.
FIFA, I think I said that one, but there's FIFA as well. And the thing is that things like Fortnite, Dota, League of Legends,
PUBG.
probably quite a lot of the others, all have in common is actually they're free to play, and they're massively popular. Like, they have massive player bases.
Yeah.
As well, and I reckon a lot of the people who enjoy watching Fortnite on Twitch or YouTube or whatever are people who play it and are basically watching someone be far better than them at it, or watching people at the pinnacle of this thing that they do. You have something like FIFA, which is certainly not free to play, but it shifts millions and millions of units every year because it's,
Football.
arguably the best version of the most popular sport in the world. You have lots of, I mean, some people probably watch some FIFA tournament or streams who just like football, but a lot of them are FIFA players, and there's a massive player base. When it comes to simming, you've got a lot of people who are interested in real world racing. Simming itself is relatively niche. Are people who are interested in real world racing and not simming gonna be interested in watching a sim unless it's COVID and there's no racing? And your hypothetical conversation with your dad, I imagine, is quite indicative of hypothetical conversations with a lot of people.
Yeah, I honestly think it comes down to, how people are actually interested in racing and racing games. I mean, Formula One, for example, is and always has been a niche sport. If you compare it to like football, it's always been like a specific audience. You would have people that would dip in and dip out, for a race during the season. You might have, nice worldwide viewing figures and things like that, but it's very dependent on what's happening with the sport. Like obviously if there's a period of dominance or, whatever, it can turn people off. Whereas with football, doesn't really happen. Like you still get people showing up to games, you still get people watching the games. It kind of just keeps rolling on regardless, and it doesn't feel like that happens with motorsports as much. And in fact, right now, if you look at IndyCar and NASCAR, there's like, they've had a little bit of a resurgence with a little bit of schedule changes and car changes and things like that, but it's been on a downward trend since the early 2000s, and I think that carries over to who's playing racing games. Like if you look at sales figures and things for Forza or for Gran Turismo, very successful in terms of sales, but if you actually look at how many people are playing them once they've been released and once everybody's bought them and stuff like that, it seems like it's a way lower percentage that will buy a racing game and keep playing a racing game versus buy all other types of games and keep playing those games. It seems for a lot of people like a racing game is just something to add to their collection.
Unless it's Mario Kart.
Yeah.
That's got legs.
Yeah, it does.
It does actually. I think Gran Turismo is a good example though in that sense, because it's big when it comes out. It will sell a lot, and there will be a lot of people playing it concurrently for that first 6 months. And now, if you look at GT7, I guess it's nearly 18 months old now, and there will still be, fairly full servers of people playing it, but you'll probably find yourself bumping into the same names a little bit more often.
Haven't they just announced they're shuttering the servers for that? Or some GT servers.
That's for GT Sport.
Okay, which is the 2014 game, I think. Yeah.
Probably fair enough. Then.
I thought they'd already shuttered that, to be honest. But yeah, I mean, this applies to a great deal of games. A lot of people, the way they play video games is to buy a new game every month or whatever the big title coming out is, and play that, and then they move on to the next thing. And I think Gran Turismo fits into that bracket for a lot of people. There's a lot of people I've spoken to in the last year who are like, oh, it's great to play Gran Turismo, I haven't played a racing game in years, sort of thing. And they will be the same for Forza Motorsport and things like that, which are obviously the bigger ones. And I think when you look at the games, the big games, esports wise, I mean, stuff like League of Legends or Dota 2 and Counter-Strike. I mean, Counter-Strike's been around for so long. There are, I think, what happens with those types of games is they're the sort of games that there will be people that play and they don't play really any other games. This is their game. Like people will be with World of Warcraft, or people will be. A lot of people are with iRacing. To be honest, I see a lot of people on the iRacing forums who are like, well, I don't play any other games. The only reason I have a PC is to do iRacing, and fair enough. And you can reflect in that to be at a level of competency in iRacing or any other sim requires a lot of practice, a lot of time. So you may not have time to play other video games. But yeah, I mean, my point from earlier really is that I think that in the longer term, the games that have the best chance of becoming truly popular to a larger audience are not games that are trying to replicate existing real world sports. Games like League of Legends or Counter-Strike, they are essentially inventing new sports as they go, and their popularity that is massive now based around massive player bases may well maintain in 20-30 years time. You might find somebody who's 50 years old and still watches League of Legends online tournaments, the World Cup once a year because they played it when they were 20.
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, if you think about that though, like if you look at Trackmania, that's obviously a fictional setting racing game.
Hot Wheels, right? Loops and stuff. Yeah.
Yeah. So they have had esports tournaments and stuff like that. It's been successful. It's worked. There's been no issues with the software. Like you can't kind of blame viewing figures on the fact that they had software crashes or anything like that kind of going on. So when I'm saying successful, I mean that the viewing figures are what they should have been basically, and they weren't anything still compared to a lot of other genres of game. And I don't honestly think racing fits esports. And it's painful to say that, but I just think we are this little niche area as fans of racing, fans of racing games and stuff, and it like the wider viewing audience just isn't there.
Yeah.
If you look at the thing as well, is that if there's a reason why, say, esports cricket isn't a big thing. There's certain sports or games or whatever that by their very nature just don't work. And if you think about, if you look at the things that are successful, I mean, a Counter-Strike game lasts a few minutes, and it's like bang, 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 round, knockout, tournaments, etc. I haven't watched much of these things, but I don't imagine a Dota game lasts 45 minutes or something.
No, again, it's quite quick. I mean,
the idea of me sitting down to watch someone else race 30 laps in anything, as someone who's interested in racing, interested in cars, interested possibly in the title, it's like, no offense to review you, but if you said, I'm racing tonight, do you want to watch? I'd be like, no, not at all.
Cheers, Simon.
Yeah, I am someone that like I watch Twitch, I watch YouTube, I actually watch people playing games, and I do watch people playing racing games and stuff like that, and the reason for it that I figured out is that I watch people who are doing something that I can't do, and there's multiple reasons why I can't do it. The first one is time. If I don't have time to play a game with a big storyline in it, I will watch a Twitch streamer go through the entire storyline of that game, and I don't have to buy it. And that's great. and with with certain racing games and stuff like that, like there's a streamer on Twitch who's called Stephen Bailey, that he's just recently been going through every single racing game every single rally game that he can find. And it's been really interesting to see the progression in the software and stuff like that. And I've found that interesting for that reason. And again, it's because I am someone that I literally have a system that will run every single racing game ever. I've bought like the video cards that had like one racing game supporting them and stuff like that. I haven't had the time to go out there and actually spend the time running those games. I've just had the time to go on eBay and be like, okay, that's the card I need, and then put it on my shelf, you know. And so it's there for when I get old and, you know, I can retire, and I'm kind of going through my Steam library and my old big box library. But yeah, there's multiple reasons why I watch these people, and like with first-person shooters and stuff like that, I know that I lived a little bit of a sheltered life when I was a kid, where I basically only played racing games, and I literally don't have I don't know if it's the dexterity in my fingers and, you know, with the mouse control and everything, to be as good at a first-person shooter ever as those people that I can watch. You know, like there's certain guys that I'll watch that will, you know, be kind of playing this, and it shows a level of skill, and I appreciate the skill, that's why as well I might watch someone having a race. But, you know, flipping that around completely, why am I not interested in watching esports?
I think so if I'm like you, Tim, in that I spend some time, not a huge amount, but I spend some time watching random Twitch streams or video game content on YouTube and stuff. And there's a slight tangent, but I'll bring it back to the kind of question. There's a channel on YouTube called Summon Insult, and what he does is he makes these quite in-depth 45-minute long kind of documentary style history of a certain speedrun category or something. Might be here's the history of speedrunning Super Mario Brothers, and it'll talk you through the history of who was involved and like how the time came down and why that happened. So, you know, how they discovered this trick, or this player had the ability to do this thing that no one thought was possible, and so on and so forth. And I've never speedrun Super Mario Brothers. I don't care, but I find it quite fascinating and interesting in its own way, and I watch it. And what you have is kind of a story, there's a narrative. And if you think about real world racing, imagine F1 every week was just some random people who could drive put in, but there wasn't, here's the story of the championship and everything else. If you're going to watch esports and enjoy it, you probably, unless you happen to have a particularly exciting race, which I in my cynicism concede could happen, ultimately you're going to have to commit to the season and care about who these people are and care about, right, what's at stake and what's the history and everything. It's kind of like turning on a soap opera halfway through. You're not going to watch it and think, oh, this is amazing. You're just going to think, well, who's that? What they on about? I don't care. And then when you throw in that, some of the kind of, I don't know, shithousery we covered in our cheating conversation, where you actually think, you know what, I'll give this a go, and it's like, they're just taking the piss by running it on the apron or doing stupid
putting
stuff.
One wheel on the grass all the way.
Yeah,
up
where
the
it kind of
yeah.
it almost like, I don't mean it's in a kind of sort of melodramatic way, but they're kind of disrespecting the thing you're actually quite passionate about. You sort of think, oh, you don't deserve my time to watch you behaving like this. And it just, I honestly don't think I would have to be paid to watch it, and I would have to be paid more than a kind of nominal figure. You know, like I've got just no desire to watch it at all.
I think to me as well, and an exciting race I find much less exciting if there is nothing on the line, and by that I mean when racing drivers are doing this in real life, there is personal risk involved. And it's not, I don't want to see people get hurt or anything like that, but the fact of the matter is that when somebody chucks a car up the inside of another car at 100 miles an hour, that takes a certain amount of, mental energy that doesn't exist, and emotional energy that doesn't necessarily exist in a sim. I'm not saying it's easy in a sim, because I do it enough, but it's just not the same as when you're in a situation, where you can get hurt, or you could come together with that driver and both of you get hurt. It's a very different thing. And so when I'm watching it, as opposed to being the person doing it, I don't get as engaged. Whereas when I do see somebody, put in a great move in a race, in a fast corner or whatever, I've got more sort of awe and respect for that person than I ever would if I saw them doing it in a sim.
Yeah, I realized years ago that I am drawn to the anticipation of something more than I am the thing. And I find that with racing especially. Like I always, when people bring up about F1 being boring and stuff like that, I always bring up like Mansell not passing Senna at Monaco in 1992. That was like my most exciting memory as a, kind of probably 12, 13-year-old, or watching F1 was basically nothing happening. I think about, like older NASCAR races that I've watched and stuff. There was a championship battle between Tony Stewart and Carl Edwards, which came down to the final race. Basically, the one who finished in front of the other was going to win the championship. This was before stages or anything else of that nonsense. So it was a flag to flag race between those two guys. And for the entire race, they were like first and second. Nobody else was even involved with a shot. Yeah. And they were nose to tail for the entire race. And it was like nothing happened, but they were nose to tail. And
it was so tense, yeah.
They were getting 100% out of those cars, like every single turn. And it was the most exciting NASCAR race that I've ever watched.
I would also cite the 1998 Japanese Grand Prix in similar terms. The championship between Hakkinen and Schumacher, they were both absolutely on it around Suzuka, and everybody else might as well have not turned up. And they went out there and they put on a show between the two of them, and it was stunning to watch. But what happened was, Hakkinen led, Hakkinen won the race. But like you knew that was two men at the maximum of their abilities.
Take the Singapore GP a few weeks ago. I mean, it was for a start. Red Bull didn't win, but it wasn't exciting at the end because they were DRSing past each other 10 times in the last 5 laps. You were watching, is it going to happen? And in the end, it didn't. But that didn't make it less exciting.
Yeah,
it wasn't. It didn't need it to happen to be exciting. It was the anticipation of the tension of will it happen.
Yeah, I actually made a tweet and said, congratulations if you just enjoyed that race. You actually enjoyed an old school F1 race, without DRS having basically any effect whatsoever.
Yeah.
I think I actually said to my wife during that, one of these guys is going to bin it, and I don't know which one it will be. And then sure enough, George Russell binned it on the final lap. I was like, I knew one of them would.
But yeah, the actual point of that, and the fact that I realized that anticipation is the thing. Is like when I'm watching a sim race, I don't know. It's like I don't know whether they're too perfect, and I
mean, everyone's had an absolutely obscene amount of track time and practice, right? Unlike when the F1 circuits or NASCAR or whoever turn up at the circuit, they got a couple of hours and then they're into the race. It's not the same.
I do think with sims in general, and it's obviously something that's improved a huge amount over the years, and it's not meaning like throwing out some blanket criticism, but even in the best case, there is a certain lack of fidelity to what you see outside of the car compared to real life. Those slight kind of skittish moments of the car, the tiny little slides and corrections, the sort of micro twitches and everything else.
Yeah.
That watching a sim car, put aside all the things that we've kind of discussed up to now, including, like you correctly raised, John, about the kind of jeopardy of the whole thing, it's not as exciting to watch a simulation car as a real one. It's
No.
much more muted. It's much more
R-Factor 2 in particular, it looks far better from within the car than it does from the outside of the car. It's hard to explain why that is, but it's just...
It is interesting, like, bringing that up, though, because I mean, in real racing, even if the driver was like a sim racer is, where basically they would be capable of braking at what is essentially exactly the same point, turning in at exactly the same point, and was magically aware of how much grip their tyre has. The fact is that the wind could be 1/10 of a mile an hour different in real life, and then that turn is going to be different for them.
Yeah.
Whereas in current simulations, it's not. Well,
that's slowly coming into change, isn't it? You know, like there are some sims bringing that in, but there are also sims that are, you know, pushing out races online where that is not the case. You're quite right. Yeah.
Yeah, because they want it to be even for everybody. You know, if the guy in first gets his wind that's slightly different from the guy in second, they have to make it even. One of the things I was thinking about when we were talking about the anticipation of something is, you know, there's always the anticipation something's going to go wrong with the car as well, and that's not an issue in sim racing because they want to make it even for everybody.
We also that's an interesting point as well, because another thing that I repeatedly see in sim racing is this push for fairness and similarity and everything, and so you see, for instance, in series in iRacing, where in the GT3 series there are a bunch of different cars, obviously. And so next week comes along, we're at a different circuit from what I've heard. I don't do the GT3 series, and I think it's the same in GTP now that there are a number of LMH cars. There are people within the community who will test all of the cars and then come into the forums and say, look guys, this car is the best for this week. And so instead of having a varied GT3 field, you have a whole load of Ferraris, and then next week we have a whole load of Audis or whatever, right? The tendency in sim racing for people to do this is like in GPL, where, you know, everyone's jumping in the Lotus 49 because they'd heard it was the quickest. One of the genuine aspects of intrigue in real world motorsport to me is seeing a driver perform exceptionally in a car that is not capable. However, if you have parity, then we all know who the best driver is, we all know who the middling driver is, we all know who the worst driver is, because they've all got exactly the same machinery. Now, even with setup differences, you know, it's not going to be exactly the same, because if you have fixed setup, maybe it's similar. But if you look at a series like Formula 2, where in theory everybody's got the same machinery, they don't. They don't have the same engineers, they don't have the same mechanics. You know, the team that is operating the car is different, same in IndyCar, and you see different results. And, you know, even when you look at, because I was thinking about this in GT3 actually earlier, I remember talking about this with Aris, about the Honda GT3 car, the first Honda NSX GT3 car. I think it's had a couple of revisions since, but the first car, and it was in Assetto Corsa Competizione straight out. And I read about this car in Race Car Engineering magazine, and they said that it had a fundamental problem that with cooling, and it would overheat. The front dampers would overheat, and as they overheated, they began to lock up. And so I remember talking to Aris about this, going, this is a really cool thing that we should have in a sim, etc., etc. And he was like, sort of like, yeah, okay, whatever you mental case. But it's the point I'm trying to say is that when Ben Barnicoat had signed up to drive that Honda NSX for the season, he didn't get to just go, oh, actually, you know,
I'll take a Ferrari instead.
Yeah, it seems like this car's a load of rubbish, actually. So when we get to Silverstone, I don't really want to drive this car. So see you later. But that doesn't diminish, in the eyes of the connoisseur watching that series, that doesn't diminish the performances of Ben Barnicoat when you take into account the restrictions of the machinery he's dealing with.
Would you like to see, with iRacing then, for their fixed series, they can do whatever the hell they want. If someone wants to switch cars every week, you know, that could be fine. But for the unfixed, how about if they did something like, you can race like 3 cars over the entire season, or 2 cars over the entire season, or something like that. So you can only switch a certain amount of times.
I mean, I would say that you nominate...
No switching.
Yeah, no switching. I would say
no switching.
Well, I mean, I'd say that you get a chance, right? You nominate your car for the season, and that is the car that you score championship points in. So if you want to drive a Ferrari at Silverstone because it's quicker, fine, but you're not going to get any points towards your championship position.
Okay.
And I know that there's plenty of people who probably don't care about their championship position, so will be happy to still switch about. But the people that do care, and certainly that usually the people that are in the top 20 of the Division 1 anyway, are going to care. Make them choose their car. And they're going to probably then still choose the car that is the best spread across the races, the tracks, but,
Yeah, but the season might be more interesting because there's going to be a ringer. There's going to be some guy who picked the best car for that one track, who then, might make a race interesting for them. And what's wrong with that,
Yeah.
But
I don't know how popular this would be or if it'd work, but you could also have people you sign up to the league and then you get randomly assigned a car. Whether then you would just see drastic dropout rates. I don't know.
You see a lot of dropout. I mean, I think my suggestion of championship points would not go down well, frankly. Like, people tend to want the freedom to be able to swap about and choose. And, I know a lot of sim racers that, are driving a different car every week anyway, or every day, potentially. So, being able to jump around and have that flexibility is part of, in theory, the joy of sim racing. But, under my regime, I wouldn't permit such wanton flexibility.
My first and best Grand Prix Legends League, there was I think like 2 people were allowed to choose the Lotus, and then there was like like 3 of this, 3 of this, 3 of this, the second season he basically put the people who finished further down in the championship in the fastest cars and stuff like that. It was great. Absolutely great, and it's what led me to end up driving the Honda everywhere, because I just enjoyed being fast in a slower car, and the Honda was actually capable of that. But yeah, it was so much fun. It was a great kind of variation every single race weekend. It was so different from the weekend before.
And you didn't necessarily have the best guys driving the fastest car.
No. So it was really, really good.
Just going back a slide in the conversation though, you think about that, and that experience, but also that attitude, would just never sit in esports.
No. Yeah, because they're in it for the money.
Or whatever it is, but it's basically about winning.
Mm-hmm.
It's not about enjoyment or simulating something where it's not you winning.
Yeah.
And that's one of the, you think, and again, this kind of can go across other genres. The number of, I've never played the game, never had any interest in it, but Championship Manager, Football Manager title was a proper kind of cult phenomenon, certainly in the UK 20 years ago, whatever. And
Still
people would
now.
basically. Probably. And people would pick like their real crap local team and try and take them up through the ranks and stuff. And it's not just about saying, right, I'm going to be Real Madrid, or I'm going to be Barcelona, or I'm going to be Man City, and I'm just going to win because I start with the best team. It's about being the underdog and like the experience of trying to succeed against the odds.
Yeah.
Like you say, you can take the Honda out and you're not necessarily expecting to win every race. It might not literally be possible to win. But it's about actually how, in this role of I am in this car, what's the best I can do? It's a very different experience, and that's one of the great things that Sims can offer as an experience. And I think esports just takes that out. And just very quick on this as well, going back to like the conversation we're talking about cars included perhaps as like a passion project. I think that's the thing for me with esports, is that in a sense, although it's possibly the highest possible stakes, it's almost like the coldest form of simming. It's not about passion and love for the content or the subject. It's about winning. And I think that's the antithesis of why I sim, and so maybe that's why I've just got zero interest in it at all.
And you could quite easily argue that a GT3 sim right now is literally the least passionate project that you could push out of the door as a studio, because you basically it's a safe bet, but at the same time, a lot of sim racers will see a GT3 sim, they're like, oh, it's another GT3 sim. But the thing that you were talking about, where it's like, that that these people do obviously do this to win, and that comes with the money and stuff like that. There is no reason why an esports competition couldn't use a 10-year-old sim if they could get permission from the developer or kind of whatever for it. But they and the fact that with Rensport, basically they built the sim as kind of an esports thing first, like before they even released a version to the public, like at all. They'd already had their first esports event, and obviously, you can see from the footage, like it wasn't a good, enjoyable thing to drive, but all of the teams are still there, all of the drivers are still there because they're there to win. They're not there to have fun.
I mean, you can say, another GT3 title, but if that's a title that's the title for esports, they're going to be driving it, even if they absolutely hate the content and the title.
Exactly. But yeah, that kind of leads into something that I wanted to touch on, or to make sure that we touch on, is when because esports events can go bad. Like that's the thing with this whole Rensport thing, is that I think that the sim itself is struggling to be a kind of a totally positive experience, but the event was done perfectly. The viewership figures are still lower for the reasons that we've obviously discussed, but everything that the ESL did seems to have been done in a really positive way. They had good presenters, good commentary, good footage of the sim. They were able to cover what each driver was doing, cover the storyline of the race, everything like that. And that was done really, really well. And then if you contrast that, I don't know if you guys remember when Formula E did an event with R Factor 2, but it was but it was pretty badly messed up. I actually think there's a couple of things that were messed up that aren't even public that were messed up yet. But I
have to wait for your memoirs, Tim.
Yeah, that'll be in there. But what was ultimately frustrating, as someone that worked for the studio that made R Factor 2 at that point, was that Formula E basically set up this event with a third party, who then just basically licensed R Factor 2, and then announced that they were going to do it. So the developer had nothing to do with it, and they'd used a mod that had problems. So, and in a large way, because they ended up having the sim then with the mod problems affected the race, it then affected the whole event, and, it affected the event in ways that aren't public either. But yeah, it kind of, it's interesting to see that it doesn't seem to make a difference whether something goes right or wrong. You're going to get the viewership when either people just want to see the sim, or there's some kind of like drama that isn't even the racing. Because that was the thing with the R Factor 2 event with Formula E, is that it got massive viewing figures, it got like coverage across multiple different websites and stuff like that, and it basically only got that because it messed up.
Well, the only one I've heard of recently was the one where Verstappen had a big hissy fit because it didn't work out. That was in R Factor 2, I think. And it's like,
exactly.
That's basically what I've heard.
In iRacing, that was.
Was it?
No,
okay.
he also had one with R Factor 2 where he uninstalled it while he was on stream.
That was Le Mans, though, wasn't it? That was Le Mans 24 hours, and there was a problem. Publicly uninstalled it, but more recently, Verstappen had an exciting time where he took somebody out deliberately and things like that. Which sure, tempers run and whatever, but basically it doesn't really shine well on esports as a whole. When somebody, literally the highest profile person in all of motorsports, is doing that. It's great
And
to have the highest profile person in all of motorsports doing esports. I think that's great.
Yeah.
But then to have them then basically make it look stupid is not good.
Yeah, and I mean, as far as the sponsor's concerned, they probably don't care about that. You know, they get their viewing figures or whatever metric they were in it for, and they're probably perfectly happy. But the thing is that as a developer, that's awful. You know, it's something that you're going to hear about from every single fan of every other sim because of the tribalism that we have in, sim racing. That's Verstappen having that issue is going to be something that every iRacer is going to bring up for years, and so
it might make people want to watch. It doesn't make people want to buy the product.
Yeah, exactly.
That's the thing.
That's the Bernie Ecclestone thing, isn't it? Any publicity is good publicity. That sort of argument.
Just doesn't feel like it.
Yeah. Another point you were saying about GT3 being an easy win. It's an interesting one because there is the sense that yes, apparently it's that perfect balance of it's not too slow, it's not too fast, and like most people seem to be able to drive it well enough, and then it's also got this easy to do, difficult to master thing going on. But when you put GT3 into your brand new sim, you're immediately giving a direct line of comparison with every other sim that already exists. And if you put out a sim that was just 1965 Formula One cars, you would find that not the case because, of course, you would have no other sim compare to. So you can say, well, somebody could say, oh, well, the physics are a bit dodgy when you do this, and you go, well, no, that's just how these cars handled, I'm afraid, Whereas if you go GT3, you're putting yourself in direct competition, directly comparing the physics implementation you have against every other sim that's already out there, and it can expose you.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. I mean, if you look at when I was seeing if there'd been any other YouTube coverage on the Rennsport and R Factor 2 thing today, like I searched that on YouTube, and everything that came up really, except from two videos, was a comparison between Rennsport and R Factor 2.
Yeah.
So it's.
I can't imagine why people are doing that.
Yeah, I mean, I kind of, because I've said in previous podcasts and things, like I would quite happily never put a GT3 into a sim that I was in control of in any way at all. I would much rather have, kind of lower downforce vehicles, which means older vehicles, because obviously everything seems to be converging to this, we have to have as much downforce as possible kind of area. But it kind of it's a little bit frustrating, but I understand it, and it's always been this way. Like I've read kind of internal memos and things like that from Sierra executives being kind of really worried about certain types of simulations that Papyrus wanted to make, and kind of putting them off, doing these sims and them skipping doing them and stuff, it's really always happened. They've always gone for the safer option. The big risks, of course, such as Grand Prix Legends and stuff like that, you look back and they didn't sell as well as anybody would have wanted them to. So, they obviously were a risk.
But yet they are still being played 25 years later.
Yeah, exactly. But they only got paid once.
Yeah. Well, that's why you need a live service, right?
Yep, and that's probably where that idea came from.
Yeah,
for iRacing.
So.
Yep.
On that subject, what's the business model with Rennsport? I've no idea. So I know it's in like closed beta now, but is it going to be like a paid product, a subscription service, a free to play? I genuinely have no idea.
That's been relatively confusing to try to figure out. When things were first announced, I felt that it was an EFT thing, where because they still have the language on their website where it's talking about digital ownership of your cars, and
NFT.
things like that. Yeah, sorry.
Yeah.
For some reason, I have Escape from Tarkov in my head right there, which is a first-person shooter, which I watch on Twitch a lot. But anyway, yeah. So NFTs and they still have that language on their website, even though they have come out and said that it's not an NFT game. But I am on a lot of like press kind of listings and stuff like that, so I constantly see kind of NFT games still being released, where it's, as far as I can figure out, it's about just collecting the content that is in this game. It's like, you get our game and then you can collect all of these things and it's only this amount of money, and that's what I thought it was when it first came out, and they have come out and directly answered that and said that it's not going to be, but they haven't really put out an answer of what it is. And yeah, it's just still a bit confusing,
because like the Dota and Fortnite and those things, they're free to play but make insane amounts of money from basically in-game purchases, but they've got player bases that are far bigger than Rensport is ever going to have. So obviously iRacing is working. I've no idea about their kind of profit lines and stuff, but they've been going, they're still going, foreseeably carry on going, and yes, they've got deep pockets behind them, but it's not a charity. They've obviously found something that works, or you have your one-off purchases, but if you're creating this thing as an esport platform, you need to either make a load of money up front by selling this thing, or you need to have some ongoing income, and I'm just not sure how that works.
Maybe raise entry fees. That'll go down well.
Yeah. I mean, this is the thing that is a little bit, kind of confusing. It is that it doesn't seem yet to be a defined product, or they haven't publicly released what their overall design is going to be. But they have said, that they're going to have all of these things, including modding and stuff like that. And I can't help but feel that there would have been nothing wrong with just being an esports platform. If that's your thing, why would you not kind of just go with that and have people that want to give themselves a shot, really go in there and just basically sell sponsorships, have an entry fee, have everybody that wants to take a shot actually take a shot, and give it that clear direction, because right now it doesn't feel like it's got a clear direction, because it's going to be esports and it's going to be offline, it's going to be online, it's going to be modding, it's going to be every single sim that has ever existed. And it just seems that with the pace of development and everything, I have had doubts basically from the beginning, and they've only got stronger, and I don't see it.
If you want to form up a sim racing product that is basically mirroring to some extent real world motorsport, then you're working on the basis of probably relatively with lower outright costs, but a car isn't going to cost literally £100,000, but you work on the basis that people have to put some money in, and it isn't until you reach a certain point in the meritocracy where you will start getting money out, or reasonable money out of it. And so you could work on that basis, but I think if you're going to do that, you need to mirror the professionalism of real world motorsport. You need to have live stewarding, you need to have races being properly organised events, and not zero consequence as well.
Well, the thing that I think this is where it becomes kind of interesting, though. So if you think about reality, if you're talking at grassroots level, club sport level, then you're putting money in. If you're lucky, some sponsorship and prize money helps cover a set of tyres here and there and stuff, but you're basically sticking money in and you're not getting anything back.
Right.
It's like any sport. It's only when you get to the very top levels that you're actually a professional in the true sense, and then at the very, very elite level, you're really making significant money from it. But the thing is, at those levels,
but doesn't that sound like a lot of the design around microtransaction based mobile games and things like that? You know, that's a very similar design. You get nothing back at the beginning. You put a lot in. In theory, you're getting enjoyment out of it, right? But like, you know, if you then become really, really good at this, then you might get something back from it.
Yeah, but the thing is, if you take Fortnite and let's say it's got, I don't know, 500 million players or something, which is completely plucked out of thin air, but it wouldn't surprise me if it's not a million miles away. They've got a lot of people will never have stuck a single penny into that, and then you'll have a load of people who've put a few pounds or dollars here and there in, and then you'll have some people who've stuck silly amounts in, and only a relatively small number of people actually get anything back. But there's not a high barrier to entry there. You don't have to stick $200 into buying an outfit and everything else. You can spend that if you want, or you've stolen your mum's credit card or whatever else. So for that to be the business model for, say, an eSports sim title, though, you've got to have the player base to make that work. And you know, Tim, going back to your question of like, why didn't they just make it an eSports title? I guess the thing is, you think back to, you look at how many sim titles are made, it's relatively not very many, and then how many are actually successful, even less still. You know, the idea of, oh, we're going to develop this and it's going to be successful as an eSports title, to me seems like a real long odds kind of gamble. So I can understand why they maybe try and hedge their bets and spread it around. And maybe the flip side of that is that it is a slightly muddied strategy or title, and who knows whether there is a clear vision or whether it's constantly evolving. I've no idea, but then to be honest, I've not bothered to try and find out. I'm just waiting to ask you for the answers instead.
Yeah, I think from my perspective, you know, if I was doing like a game design, I would want to be able to support leagues. I'd want to be able to support broadcasting, and then essentially whatever anybody does with that is up to them. If someone else wants to get a sponsor and, you know, kind of figure things out, that's their problem. I would just want to have the basics in there to support leagues effectively, and then that gives you the ability to have an esports event. And but I wouldn't put like a massive amount of time into, you know, esports and figuring that out, because I honestly don't think it works as well for sim racing as other platforms.
Okay. Well, I think we've grumbled on about this long enough now. Let's call it a day. How can people get in touch with you, Tim, on Race Sim Central? Get in touch with us, rather, on Race Sim Central.
Well, I'm on most, I won't say every social media platform, because Simon corrected me on that last time, but I'm on most social media platforms as Race Sim Central, all one word, and yeah, you can check out the website at racesimcentral.net, and yeah, just seek me out.
Obviously the website to go to for breaking news in the sim racing industry. Okay, well, thanks for listening, everybody, and we'll see you next time.